Welcome to today's webinar titled Timber Framing 101. I would like to thank Timbercraft for hosting this event alongside the Log and Timber Home Show. Our speakers for this workshop are Bob Sternquist, President of Timbercraft, and Dave Markham, Vice President of Timbercraft. They both have over 20 years of experience with designing and building timber frames. Before we begin today's workshop, I would like to host a video from our sponsor, Timbercraft.
Timber framing is one of the oldest styles of construction in the world. In fact, it dates all the way back to the Old Testament. That's why we traveled to Michigan and met up with one of the world's greatest timber frame manufacturers, Timbercraft. For over 40 years, Timbercraft has been perfecting the art of timber framing with state-of-the-art design and manufacturing techniques. Timbercraft has taken it to a whole new level.
Here at Timbercraft, we are architectural craftsmen that design, manufacture, and install heavy timber frame structures, both for residential and commercial use. Our company was founded in 1978, and our mission is to honor our creator and our craft. What makes Timbercraft a very unique and amazing company is we do a type of construction that's over 2,000 years old. However, we've modernized it. Now we've brought it into our manufacturing facilities, so it's a controlled environment with CNC equipment. We actually service the entire country, and we build internationally. When you build in different geographic areas, you have different constraints that you have to deal with. On the West Coast, you have earthquakes and seismics, or in the mountains, you have heavy snow load. We have the experience to help our customers go through that process and bring their ideas to life and build their dream timber frame home.
With a full in-house design and engineering team, Timbercraft is able to design and build structures anywhere in North America. Their focus is to design a timber frame structure that fits each individual client's budget.
Every timber frame that we manufacture is going to be very unique because our clientele's wants and needs are very different, and we're customizing each project for our customers. Some of our customers have been blessed with multi-million-dollar budgets, and some of our other customers have much more modest budgets. But one of the great things about a timber frame is anyone could have these big exposed beams. The way that we achieve that is through a process called hybrid. A hybrid timber frame is where you focus the timber framing in high-use areas of the home, possibly the kitchen, the dining room, the great room, the master bedroom, a covered porch, the main areas in the house where you actually live. Then as you get into other areas like the breezeway, closets, a guest bedroom, go ahead and conventionally build those.
With their unique style and attention to detail, Timbercraft's quality and craftsmanship is unmatched by others in their industry.
At Timbercraft, we're dedicated to a particular style of mortise and tenon joinery called the house joint. The house joint is where, instead of just the tenon going into a beam, the whole member goes in and then the tenon. And the reason that we do that is as wood dries, it wants to shrink and twist. And when it's in a pocket, you don't see that shrinkage. And if it wants to twist, it can't actually go anywhere. So the process that we do in manufacturing is we take and hand select each and every timber. Then all that detailed joinery is milled on our CNC machines, but that's only part of the process. After that, our skilled craftsmen go ahead, take these timbers, and we pre-fit or pre-assemble the entire structure, front to back and left to right. We want to make sure that it's a very tight fit and that it's perfectly accurate. And once we're done with that, we go ahead, disassemble the entire structure, label it, stain it and ship it however the customer wants, and then at that point, it's off to be built. But the key to this whole process is our house joint. It ensures that our Timbercraft timber frame is going to look exactly the same today as it does 100, 200, or 300 years from now.
As one of the world's greatest timber frame design and build firms, Timbercraft buildings are built for life.
Bob and Dave, I'll let you two take it from here.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Timber Framing 101. As Taylor mentioned, my name is Bob Sternquist, and I'm President and CEO here at Timbercraft. Our webinar today is not really a Timbercraft promotion. It's more informational webinar that's going to help navigate you as you navigate your way to timber frame ownership. Joining me today is a gentleman that I've been teaching these webinars and workshops all around the country since 2002. Is Mr. Dave Markham. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Dave.
Hey, thanks, Bob. Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today, and we hope to be able to share with you some more information that will really help you guide you along the way to owning a timber frame and living out your dream. So, if you have any questions, feel free to email either one of us. It's real simple: Bob@timbercraft.com or myself, Dave@timbercraft.com, and we'll be happy to get back with you and either by phone or by email and answer those for you. So, we really appreciate it, and so with that, we'll get started. Timbercraft has been around since 1978. It was actually started in Port Townsend, Washington by Charles and Judith Landau. We really specialize in both residential and commercial timber frames, both design and construction of them. Our plant has the unique ability of having two CNC milling machines we'll talk more about later, but it really helps increase the accuracy and the production time to get your timber frame to you as soon as possible. Okay. We also are very proud of our full-time in-house design and engineering department. We think this is a real important piece of the puzzle that you'll hear more about during this presentation, how important that design aspect is to your project. And, really our core products here at Timbercraft are the timber frames themselves, the design services. We also offer pre-finished T&G for the roof and second floor systems, and the SIP enclosures for your walls and roof. So that's our core products, and I'll turn it over to Bob to get us started here.
All right, thanks, Dave. Okay, so what exactly is a timber frame home? These are two homes. The top one happens to be my house. The other house, they look like an ordinary house, because see, the key to a timber frame isn't necessarily what's happening on the outside of the house, it's what's happening on the inside of the house. The timber frame is basically the exposed structural skeleton for the structure. And one of the coolest things about a timber frame is that you have the ability to timber frame one room, two rooms, up to the whole house. It's a method of construction. And what we're doing as an industry is pretty much kind of focusing it in the high use areas of the home. Now, the history of timber framing, a lot of people are surprised to realize it's the oldest style of construction in the world. It goes all the way back to the Old Testament, where King Solomon hired the Sidonians to come in and to build a temple for the Lord. He hired the Sidonians because they specialized in felling timber. That's how old timber framing is. Now, the Gonzalez Alvarez house in Florida happens to be the oldest timber frame structure in the United States. It's just shy of 600 years old. And the reason it's still standing is when the roof had a leak or had a broken window, those issues were fixed, so the elements were kept off of it. So when you're building with big exposed beams, clearly the structure is going to live a very, very long time. Now, timber framing was the main style of construction. Anything built prior to 1870 here in the United States is some form of post and beam or a timber frame. But it was about the 1870s, 1880s where timber framing took a step back. And really the main reason for that is we began mass producing the square head nail dimensional lumber. A lot easier to throw a 2x6 over your shoulder than an 8x8 timber post. But pretty much timber framing is the original style of construction here in the United States, Dave.
Right. And what we get a lot of times, people ask us, what's the difference between the post and beam and timber framing? We hear those different terms. And really what it comes down to is just the method of joinery, how they're connected together. Now, the timber frame is actually the true mortise and tenon that's held together by oak pegs, like you'll see in this picture right here, where post and beam means it's fabricated and held together with metal joinery, kind of after that industrial revolution. Now, at times we have to combine the two. For example, if you're in an area where there's seismic conditions or certain snow loads in that, engineering may require that there's some steel in that timber frame as well. And in a lot of cases, we'll slot that inside the timber itself, put in a steel knife plate, and then cover those bolt holes with plugs to make it look like true timber frame as well. Now, here's a good example of a house. Bob mentioned earlier that this can look like any other house on the outside. This one has a little hint of what's going on in the inside. I like doing that with the timber porches, and for example, and the maintenance you're going to have on the outside is really just like any other wood house. If you have a lot of wood on the outside, you're going to have maintenance. If you have a little bit of wood like those porches that are covered it's going to be very minimal maintenance, maybe every 3 to 5 years freshening that up. Now, the inside, there's really very minimal maintenance on the inside because you're not exposed to the UV rays from the sun, the acid rain, the weather, that type of thing. So when these timber frames go up, typically we either have them pre-finished with oil or stained for you ahead of time, or they can be stained, come out raw and stained afterwards. Really, the only maintenance, if you will, on the inside of a timber frame home is dusting out the big beams once in a while. Other than that, you don't have to worry about it. A lot of people want to know more about that because we do a lot of log and timber frame shows, and a lot of people that started out buying timber frame homes came in looking for logs, and then they realized the maintenance is involved in them. And I know I used to go out and restore these log homes and media blast them, restain them, jink them, all that good stuff. There's a ton of maintenance that's involved with it. With the timber frame, you get the beauty of that home on the inside, and you can actually do one room, the whole house, or anywhere between, like Bob mentioned earlier. Now, the timber frame industry today is really comprised of two different types of companies. There's the small hand-cut companies. This is really where all of it started out at, was actually, you see Edgar here, he's cutting out a housing by hand, chiseling it all out. And back when we were doing that, we were really kind of limited on the amount of frames we could put out in a year because our average was about one stick per man per day. So with 5 guys out working in the shop, you could only get, 5 timbers done in a day. So you were limited to anywhere from maybe 2 to 10 frames max a year, depending on how big those projects actually were. Now, today's industry is more CNC. This is the technology part of the equation. Probably about 20 years ago, Hundiger, which is a German company that specializes in machinery just for timber framing. And anything that's cut in the United States, or probably most of the world for that matter, that's CNC cut is probably cut on a Hundiger. That's kind of the crescent wrench of these tools as it goes. Really, the uniqueness of this is it takes away a lot of the mundane stuff and really speeds up production. The guys have found that there's still some hand cutting and things that need to be done, valleys and complex angles, that kind of thing, arches. But really, as you see here, the timber's going in the machine there. It's very quick. It does a lot of the mundane part of that cutting for the crews before they have to do the hand finish work. Here's the timber getting ready to go through the 4-sided planer. So every one of these goes through a planer to get 4-sided squared up before it goes into the machine there to make sure it's perfect when it comes out to your house.
Exactly. All right, guys. Now let's talk about some questions asked the timber framers as you go through this process. And one of the big things here is just figure out what the different packages all the different companies offer, because it's going to be very different. For example, here at Timbercraft, we do timber frames, we do pre-finished ceilings and floors, we do the exterior walls exclusively in structurally insulated panels. Other companies will also do windows and doors, the full lumber kit. So specifically, you're going to want to ask as you begin this journey to each company is what is included in their overall packages. I think mostly as an industry, I hate to say the shell, but I think we kind of build the shell of the house, because as a timber framer, we can go geographically all around the country and still be cost competitive if we stick to kind of the shell of the house. Now, always the local roofer, the local flooring guy, they'll be more economical in those aspects, but in terms of building the shell, I think that's probably what most customers are going to want to look for as they begin this journey. Now, another really important thing is going to be the design services. There are the different services that timber framers offer are going to vary. You do want to make sure that you work with a company that has in-house design. And the main reason for that is that the building requirements for your job and maybe a job 20 miles north from you will have different engineering requirements. So you're going to want to find a company that has this in-house design. Some companies exclusively focus just on the timber frame. I think there's an advantage to working with a company that does the architectural design as well. And one of the things, as you're beginning this journey, I think what you do want to find is someone that you connect with, someone that that can take what's in your heart and in your head and extrapolate that out on the set of plans. Now, maybe that's an outside architect or an outside residential designer. It's absolutely perfectly fine to work with an outside company, but definitely involve the timber framer early in the process. We have familiarities with spans and capabilities. Also, very important, the cost of building the timber frame. And I think that all needs to happen at the same time. Now, Dave and I, back in the mid 2000s, like 2006, 2007, we were doing this workshop actually in Charlotte, North Carolina. And unbeknownst to me, that I had connected with a customer in the audience, and she made a decision that I was going to build her timber frame. And when the workshop ended, about 40, 50 people got up and I got their information. She came up, she goes, "Bob, give me your card. I'm going to contact you in 90 days. I'm really excited to work with you." Well, about 90 days later, I got a set of plans in, and it even said, "See Bob Sternquist for timber frame details." And she loved the hammer beam. Now, the hammer beam is a very cool, unique truss, and we're going to show you some examples of that later. But one of the things that had happened is that the architect who had designed her house had no familiarity on spans and spacing. And one of the things this architect had done, they had designed the house with a 9-foot eave height for a hammer beam. Well, the challenge with using that particular truss is it would have meant I would have had timbers about 3 feet off the ground flying in the room at a 45-degree angle. And what I ended up having to share with this customer is, "Hey, we can't do a hammer beam. We can do some other trusses." But she's like, "No, Bob, I really, really want the hammer beam." So I had to share with someone who had spent over $15,000 with an architect designing a beautiful set of plans. We had to redesign her home if she specifically wanted those trusses. And she did do that. For me, I would have been devastated to spend that much in funds towards a design I would have to redesign because I didn't involve the timber framer. But had she picked up the phone and said, "Hey, Bob, I want this," I could have shared, "Hey, at least do a 14-foot eave height." I could have shared some really important information. So that's why I always encourage, definitely involve the timber framer during the design if you're going to work with the outside design firm. Also, one thing that's really important is that timber frame and log structures are very kind of unique to building departments, and so a lot of states require engineering. So make sure that the timber framer does have in-house engineering as you begin to go through this process. Now, another really important question to ask is, who's actually going to raise this timber frame? Because this is going to vary. Some companies will only provide you with a written instruction book on how to lift it. And the mass and size of these, it is a unique skill to be able to raise these. Now, this is a project that I raised over in Port Orchard, Washington, over in the Puget Sound. Now, this was a contractor that had a full crew, but what they did is they hired me individually. That's me in blue. I wish I moved that quickly. But I actually went out and taught the general contractor how to raise these and what the sequence that's required. Another option that we offer here, and most other timber framers also offer, are 4-man crews. So, certainly ask, "Hey, will I at least have a tech rep?" I mean, find out who's going to help you as you go through this process. Because one of the key things that you see here, we're not lifting this with 2x4s and draft horses and ropes. We're actually using a crane. And a crane can be very expensive. And that's where you want to at least have one experienced person that can help navigate you and move you through this process as you begin to go. Now, another important question to ask is going to be the timetables. Timetables vary depending upon the time of the year. When customers call Timbercraft, for example, in February, our lead time is only 8 weeks. Call us in May, our lead time is going to be about 12, 13 weeks. So find out what the lead times are for production. In my opinion, in our industry, I find that the spring and the fall are our 2 busiest times a year. And the main reason is, in the fall, customers have decided, let's go ahead and get the structure up before the snow flies, before things get cold. So certainly, find out what the lead times are. And Dave touched on this in terms of how are the timbers crafted. Hand cutters, CNC, both are excellent timber framers, but certainly the hand cut timber frame is going to take a little bit longer. You're going to have a larger lead time with that compared to the CNC environment. Now, the next question, I think this is probably maybe the most critical question to ask as you go through this process. Find out, do the timber framers actually pre-fit the frame front to back and left to right? Here at Timbercraft, our jobs are all around the country. So when our product leaves our manufacturing facility, we have to be dead set positive that everything fits. So that's why we fit it front to back and left to right. Because if something goes wrong, I can't run to Home Depot and buy another timber. I need to make sure that we catch, if there is a mistake, actually in our facility. There are some companies that say they test fit. The challenge that I have with test fitting is they're just making sure that the tenon goes in. When we fully pre-fit, we make sure that truss is perfectly square, and then we drill everything out. So make sure that you are finding a manufacturer that truly pre-fits their frame front to back and left to right. Another important one is going to be finishes. Find out, do they finish the structure? Here at Timbercraft, we happen to stain all of it because one of the things we know about wood is it shrinks a little bit, and if you stain a timber frame when it's first cut, it shrinks, you'll see shadow lines. So find out, do they actually finish the structure ahead of time in their facility, because I think that's real important. But one of the things that really separates all the timber framers is going to be the primary wood species that they work with. So certainly ask the companies, what species do you recommend for my project? Now, in terms of, there's all kinds of different wood species that you can use, but certainly Douglas fir, oak, pine, in my opinion, are kind of where the whole timber frame industry is. Now, the characteristics of these woods, and we'll talk about that in a minute, are very, very different. Now, this is a gentleman over in our lumber yard over in Riddle, Oregon. That's where our Douglas fir comes from. It comes off the coast of Oregon. Now, if you notice, he is 6 feet tall. So that is an enormous size timbers that we're harvesting. So with Douglas fir, we're able to get very large, big beams, and it tends to be free of heart. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here shortly. But depending upon whichever wood species you're going to work with are different variables. Now, most of what we're doing as an industry is we're working with green timbers. Green timbers are timbers that have recently been cut down, so there's still a lot of moisture in there. And so as green frames, and what we like to do when we work with green material here at Timbercraft, we like to have it cut, bring it in. We happen to air dry or partially kiln dry the wood to allow some of that shrinkage to happen, and then we cut the joinery and then we send it out to site. Now, basically, the way timber framers charge, there's 2 key variables. One is material cost, the other is production time. And so green timbers and air dry timbers are going to be your most economical approach as you go through this. Another option is to kiln dry, but kiln drying actually adds a significant expense to the cost of your materials. Now, when we say kiln dry, basically it's where you take these big beams and you put them in a microwave and you microwave them. To radio frequency kiln dry a timber, it's usually 2 months, 58 days these beams go in there. Now, the reason why this is so expensive is, for starters, the wood is harvested and then it's sent to a specialized kiln that dries the wood. So you have some expense there. However, when you microwave wood, it's very similar, and I've always used the hot dog analogy. What happens when you microwave a hot dog for 1 minute on a paper plate? Put it in the microwave, you cook it. The moisture comes out, it kind of checks and moves a little bit. Timbers do the exact same thing. So when we kiln dry timbers, we usually have to put in a beam that's 1 to 2 inches bigger than your desired, because we know it's going to twist and turn a little bit. And after that happens, we then bandsaw it down. So the expense in kiln drying is going to be the shipping to and from the kiln, the oversize, and then you're actually probably losing 10 to 15% of the material, because we know it's going to check, we know it's going to move, and we have to bandsaw it down. Kiln dry is a great option, but it will probably add about 40% additional to the cost of the timber frame package. Now, another option is going to be reclaimed timbers. In terms of character, off the chart, coolest things in the world. These old timber frames that you see falling down in the country, that material is still good. Now, obviously, the areas that's rotted is not, but what we do as an industry is we actually cut that rot off, and then we bring the timbers in. But this, in my opinion, reclaim is even more expensive than kiln dry, because usually you have to pay someone to buy the barn. You then have to pay a crew to go disassemble the barn. And then when you bring it into our facility, because of all the different things over the 100, 200 years that may be in those timbers, we can't put it on our CNC equipment. So what we actually have to do is take wands and go over and try and find all the different steel that's in these timbers. We remove it, and then we cut the new joinery. Now, I have a man cave above my garage, and one of the things I did there is I did a reclaimed timber frame bar. Absolutely beautiful. We wanded all the wood, we looked for all the steel, but you know what happened once we started cutting the joinery? We found some bullets that had been shot into these old timbers. You know what those bullets did to my saw blades? Nothing good. So it's just part of the process. But here at Timbercraft, we actually have to hand cut those, and so the production time's longer. The material cost is more. So that's why overall it's going to be one of the most expensive ways for us to actually go through the process. Now, one of the things that's really important to kind of jump back with the green timbers is that timbers are going to shrink a little bit. They don't shrink lengthwise, they shrink around the waist. Now, in traditional joinery, you would have a post and you would have a girt, and they would come together and the tenon would go in. But in traditional timber framing, posts and girts were covered with lath and plaster. What we've done as an industry is we've learned that wood itself is not a great insulator. So we're now using energy efficient walls and roofs, and we moved the timber frame in. So all of the joinery is now exposed. That's why it's critically important to make sure that you do this step here called the house joint, or a pocketed joint. So instead of just the beam touching the post or its connection point, we're actually taking it in 1 inch. We're putting it in 1 inch. So if there is some shrinkage, it happens inside. If it wants to check or twist because it's a box heart wood, it can't go anywhere. It's actually in a pocket. So what you see here on the screen is the most desirable style of joinery. Now this here is an example of a non-house. This is truly traditional mortise and tenon joinery. Now, when this was first cut, it was nice and tight. And overall, in the timber frame industry, there are excellent manufacturers out there. In my opinion, where you see the quality and craftsmanship is not really year 1, year 2, it's year 5, 6, and 7. It's what attention did they pay to how it's going to dry. Now, when this was first cut, it was beautiful. But 10 years later, this is the quality of joint that you're going to end up getting if you don't have a house joint. Now, in designing a timber frame for your budget, we've talked about fir, oak, and pine, cedar are kind of the main wood species that we work with. Certainly Douglas fir, oak are the 2 strongest wood species. People are surprised to learn that Douglas fir is a little bit stronger than the oak. And the main reason for that is that oak weighs 6 pounds a board foot, Douglas fir weighs only 3. So it's half the weight. So the weight of oak just gives it a little disadvantage, which makes Douglas fir the strongest. Cedar and pine, I think, are some of the most beautiful wood species, but doggone, they can barely hold themselves up. So it's one of the challenges when you work with those different wood species like that. So your options overall is to timber frame the entire house, but truly where we're at as an industry are hybrid timber frames. Now, a hybrid timber frame is where you focus it in the main areas of the house. Maybe, for example, like in my son's room, if I would have put timbers in his room, he would have had ropes around him and swinging from side to side. Now, that wasn't an ideal place for me to put timbers. So we focused the timbers in the kitchen, the great room, the master bedroom, the main areas where we live. And anybody that has a realistic building budget will be able to have a timber frame through the process of hybriding. One of the other things that maybe you already own the perfect property, because the outside of your timber frame can be whatever you want it to be. We're doing a lot of timber frames additions, maybe adding timber frame great rooms. It's part of the versatility that you have with our product. But truly, again, as I mentioned, hybrid timber frames are definitely the key. Now, this is a project that I did in Ohio. This is a customer that had a modest budget, and I went through and timber framed just the center section of the home to give them that wow factor. So this is actually their timber frame after 2 days on site. This is what we had unloaded the truck and built for them. And these are the finished photos. Now, her laundry room, sure, we could have put timbers and built her the coolest laundry room in the state, but we didn't. We just focused it in those high use areas of the home. And that's one of the keys to hybriding. One of the other things that I did, this is a picture of my office, my own personal word called trimbers. when we hybrid, we tend to do a little bit of timber framing. So because I didn't want to start contrast from going from my great room into my dining room in my office, I added these beams. They're just trim. They're just hanging out up in the ceiling. People think that I have structural timbers in there, but truly, Dave, it's just cosmetic beams.
Right, and the idea behind the timber framing is really you don't have all the fancy joinery on the ends of it, so it's much less expensive to produce. You have just the cost of the timbers with end cuts on it, and so that's where we can put that in different areas of the house to keep the cost down. One of the other things I wanted to bring up, just because I noticed when Bob was talking there, he was talking about checking, and I assume that most people, that if they've been around the industry a while, understand what checking is, but I had a little joke that kind of helped clarify that. They call it checking if you like it or cracking if you don't. Okay, it's a necessary evil of wood, especially with box tart. With box tart, you have the center or the heart of the log in the center of the log. And what happens as it starts to dry, a check or a crack will open up and drive towards that heart. With that free of heart that we were talking about earlier, it's cut outside that heart and it eliminates about 70% of the checking, cracking, if you will, and twisting stuff. It's much more stable material. So that's why we primarily use the free of heart Doug fir in our projects. Now, the next thing is we talk about bents or trusses. Now, a truss is the triangle area you're seeing right there with the legs. So basically, a bent, we're going to refer to as a truss with legs, if you will. A simple bent is only 7 pieces here, you can see. So this is going to be the most inexpensive style of bent because, as Bob mentioned earlier, the two costs that primarily go into the frame itself are the big pieces of wood, the timbers, materials, and of course the joinery to connect them all together. So the less timber pieces you have, the less joinery you have, the more cost effective. Okay. If you add 2 more timbers to that, for example, on this a little bit wider great room right here, this is what we call a queen post. It's on either side of the center of that bent, and those are called the queens. This works out really well. This particular one was out in Michigan, and this was they wanted the loft area that had a great big window in it, so we put the queen post in for the first bent, and then the next bent, if you'll slide next slide, Bob, was what we call a king post. Now, a king post, you can see that it's got this timber running right down the center of that right there, and that's what designates a king post. This is probably the most common style you'll see in timber framing throughout the country because this is kind of the oldest style and it's very traditional. Now, as you can see here, this king post is a simple one, so it's not much more than what the simple truss was, just has 1 inch of timber. Now we can get fancy with those as well. If you look over to the right a little bit more, that cool pavilion with the curved roof on it, we actually took oversized timbers and cut the arc on the rafters to create that look of more of a rounded style roof on it, that steel roof. Below that are some really neat decorative timbers. These are what we call timber framing as well because they're not structural, they're not holding anything up. But you'll see they got a really nice arch bottom that's super popular right now. That's kind of the hottest thing we're seeing going on. And below that is a large king post with struts. That's, like I said, that's the most common, what you'll see. A lot of stick builders will put these little things that they make out of 2x4s up in the gables and that to give it that timber frame look. But we're all about the big mass timbers.
Exactly. You know what, Dave? One of the things that I found is these are all great points on the king post. The king post, in my opinion, happens to be the oldest style of truss or bent that's out there. In 2010, I went with my parish on a Holy Land tour. I wanted to see where all the miracles in the Bible happened. And at each one of those locations, they built churches. And these churches were 200, 400, and one was over 600 years old. And the one thing, as I got to Israel and I started my journey, I also realized I was going to go on a timber frame tour of the Middle East. And the style of bent that I found in every single church was the king post. The only thing that was different is those little 45 degrees, as Dave talked about. There was additional struts coming off of it. So just a little tidbit, Dave, I found it to be the oldest style of truss that there is, that I've ever found.
Absolutely. And if you like something a little more modern, we've done a lot of scissor trusses over the last probably 10, 15 years. These are, a little bit more decorative. Like I said, they give you more of a modern look to a house like that. So they're pretty popular as well. Now, the next truss you'll see is a 3-post. A 3-post is a great truss for a wide area or a wide room. As you see, of course, it's called a 3-post because you see the 3 posts going one on each side and one side down the center. Very traditional and 2-story houses. The next one here popped up is a 4-post. Okay, we see them in everything as well. These were very traditional of old barns, where the center section would be the area in between the base for the cows or the horses, to the paylofts over above and such. It also works great to put a fireplace right up in there. It frames a fireplace really well. You'll see one here in the background with our crew standing, looking at. You can see the beauty of the scenery in the background right there. So 4 posts gives you actually the widest spans you can go by stretching it out and transferring that weight over 4 different posts. Now, the hammer beam. This is probably my favorite truss, and it's also one of our most expensive ones. And the reason why is simple. Just look at it and see. There's lots and lots of pieces in there. There's a ton of joinery. You see those tenons coming through horizontally at the top. Those are called through tenons. They're for looks, but they also add additional strength. Down at the bottom of those 2 queen posts coming down, you see pendant ends. Those are really cool because you can be customized. We can do acorns or spears or ball style, different things you can add onto those, to make it unique to your own home. And typically with a hammer beam like that, you can only go up to about 28 to 30 feet. Now, what we've been able to do, if you look at the project to the left, this was actually a giant great room. This was 38 foot wide. So what we did was we added another pair of queens to that and made it a double hammer beam. And that was able to really clear span up to 38 feet in this particular instance. And the picture of the right is once it was, the TNG was on it and it was covered with, or stained on the inside. And that's one thing you'll notice too in some of our pictures. We really like to make sure that the TNG and the timbers themselves have a little different color to them. Where, if you have a different color, like the natural color of this TNG and the stain on the timber, it really makes the timbers pop. Or if you use the same exact colors, they kind of blend in. It doesn't give you, I think, a good look.
So what we'd like to do now is show you my house. And we built my house in 2006. And one of the things that we needed to do for my wife, I'm a builder. My family for 5 generations have been in the trades. So I could see the floor plan, I could see the timber frame, but we actually did some 3D renderings in 2006 to be able to explain to my wife exactly what it is that we have. Now, my great room on my house is 25 feet wide. Now, as Dave talked about, I used a 4-post bent. It was a great option for me to frame my fireplace right in the middle. Now, I happen to be a bird hunter, so up above, I have different birds mounted. So my first bent happens to be a 4-post bent. Now, my second bent in my great room, we went to a king post because the one thing we don't want a 3-post. We don't want a post coming down in the middle of my great room. I wanted a clear span. So we went with the king post as bent number 2. Then on bent number 3, we did a 3-post bent. So in my first 3 bents, we switched to different styles, all kinds of different things. Now, if we look up above, my kitchen is on my left. We look up in that loft in the elevations, we even added a 3-post bent in the elevation. Up in the loft, we added another king post. So you can mix and match all these different styles. Now, one of the best resources that I have found in the 20 years that I've been building timber frames has been Timber Home Living. They have done a phenomenal job of going around to Timbercraft and all the other manufacturers in featuring our homes. So it's a great resource. I can't tell you how many customers come in and they have printouts or tearouts, from Timber Home Living. Hey, I like this color, or I like this style of truss. It's a good resource. I don't get paid for that plug. I really believe in how important it is overall in the process. Now, for example, in my master bedroom, we didn't do a fancy truss. We just did a shed roof coming off the side of my timber frame. Has a very neat wow factor to it. And then when I built my garage, I actually did a gambrel bent. I love these old barns that you see in the country. I realize why as a country we're building pole barns. It's a fraction of the cost of, building a big structure, be it stick frame or with timbers. But I just love the gambrel bents, Dave. I think it's one of the most unique styles that we have in the industry.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the questions you want to ask your timber framers, what type of wall and roof are they recommending? Stick framing is, of course, a very common option. There's also another one called SIPs that we're going to talk a lot more about in just a moment. Now, this is a project we did in Bozeman, Montana. And as you can see here, after we put up the frame, they went back through and they just stick framed all the rest of it and did the zip system to try to help seal it up and keep it insulated. So you can actually put timber frame in a stick built house as well. Now, this is an example of a very well insulated house that's stick built, and this is what's called a thermal imaging camera. What a thermal imaging camera does for you is it actually goes through and measures the heat or heat loss or cold in this particular picture. So if you look at here, you see you can count every one of those sticks that are holding this up. So those are a lumber in a wall like it is essentially about an R6. So that why you could count all those is that's where your heat loss is coming out. Now this next picture is a more traditional house. This is a stick-built house that has the bat insulation, which is most common in most homes, and that's just the Pink Panther fiberglass insulation. Now the one below that is the same exact house done into with SIPs. And the difference in the colors are, like I said, the blues and greens are the lighter or cooler colors. The reds and oranges are the hotter colors. What that's showing there is your heat loss throughout the house in the wintertime. And as you can see, the windows all look the same. There's a lot of loss out through the windows. But on the stick-built house above and on the roof, you can see a lot brighter colors where that heat's coming through. So like I said, that's one thing to definitely ask, what do you recommend? Are you stick framing or are you using panels for the house?
Exactly, Dave. And I think overall, the reason why timber framers tend to enclose their structures with SIPs, if we think about a timber frame, there's usually a tall, steep room. And in traditional construction, that's a booger to heat and cool. So timber frames are desperate for energy efficiency. However, structurally insulated panels do need ridge beams, occasional rafters to sit on. So it turns out that the SIPs need timbers need energy efficiency. So the happy marriage, as we call it, I think that's pretty much why you see a lot of manufacturers actually utilize the SIPs.
Exactly, and I'm a little biased because I've been doing SIPs for over 23 years now, since when I built my first house. And I was getting ready to stick build a house because that's what I used to do. I was a stick framer, and I ran into this concept with the SIPs at a show down in Toledo, Ohio. And, after I started talking with the guy and listening to what he had to say, I was like, kind of a light bulb went on and said, man, this makes sense. They're super energy efficient. They're solid core of insulation with no thermal breaks in there. That's going to save you a lot of money. I said, so basically what it is, a SIP is a structurally insulated panel. It's an acronym for that. And it's 2 layers of OSB with a solid foam core in the center. Now, what we tend to refer to it as, Bob and I talk about, when we're talking about SIPs, as an ice cream sandwich. So everybody's had an ice cream sandwich, so they understand the 2 skins with a solid core in the middle. And now these aren't near as tasty, but they insulate much better. Okay, so the 2 different types of SIPs are, the first one there is called an EPS, or expanded polystyrene. Okay, that's about a 3.17 per inch of R value. And the good thing is it's very structural, and when laminated together, it creates an I-beam effect. Makes it extremely strong. It's about 5.5 times stronger than a stick-built wall and 3 times more energy efficient. Now, the one below that, the second other style of SIPs is called a polyurethane SIP. Now, these are fabricated a little bit differently. Instead of being laminated together, these are actually, they build the framework and they inject the foam into it. One of the advantages you see here is they can put the electrical boxes and things in for you ahead of time on those. Now, Bob, I know you've done a lot of work with EPS and polyurethanes. I know we're going to talk about both of them, but like I said, there's not a one size fits all in this equation, is there?
Exactly, and that's well said. There's pros and cons to both of them, and because here at Timbercraft we're a nationwide builder, we offer both products. They are different. Now, for example, with the EPS, here are some of the wire chases that you'll predominantly get, and it's basically melted out. So this is the type of wire chases that you get with the EPS. My passion in the 20 years I've been building has been the polyurethane. Now, this is an example of how we frame up the polyurethane. So we actually put all the dimensional lumber in ahead of time, and then it's injected. And you know what? It's not a laminated process, and since we're injecting it, what else do we want to put in there? As Dave talked about, with the polyurethane, we can actually put all the electrical boxes, conduit. For example, when I design a kitchen, and I know that we got kitchen cabinets, I actually add another layer of OSB. So instead of just having a ½ inch to hang my cabinets on, I have 1 inch of material to be able to hang them. So the polyurethane is a good system, but it doesn't fit every sort of project. Now, kind of the pros and cons and the differences between the EPS and the polyurethane is the EPS is more of a mass production. So they laminate a bunch of panels and they cut out the windows and the doors. So since it's kind of a mass production, it's actually going to cost a little bit less than the polyurethane. However, the lamination process is a little bit stronger. So on the West Coast, where you have seismic conditions, EPS is a great panel to work with. Now, the polyurethane has a higher R value per inch than the EPS, but it doesn't have the same structural characteristics. And because we're making each panel individually, there's a little bit longer lead time with the polyurethane. But overall, EPS or polyurethane, you're going to get a great panel system. And I know, Dave, you're really familiar with these R values, so I'll let you kind of explain that.
Sure. Like I said, I've been doing this for 23 years. I've got just shy of 290 SIP structures under my belt. And so I'm a little bit biased. I think it's the only way to build. It's the only product I know that pays you back month after month, year after year for as long as you own the home. Give you a quick story on that because we have a little bit of time. I built my first house out of SIPs, and it was actually the EPS SIPs like we're showing here. I used the 6.5 inch panel, which at 40 degrees is giving an R24 in the walls. I used a 10.5 inch panels in the roof, so an R39 or essentially an R40 in the roof. Okay, I built a 2,800 square foot house, 16-foot vaulted ceilings with a big ridge beam going across to hold those up. And I did the worst thing you can ever do to an energy efficient house. I filled the whole back full of glass. I put a big 9-foot slider in the master bedroom. I put a 6-foot slider in the great room. Two great big sliders in the great room, one in the kitchen, and then there's a small window in my son's room. So essentially the whole back was glass because I built it 50 foot off the water and I wanted to enjoy as much of that view as we could. And I find out big sliders like that are less expensive than big windows. Well, that's where most of your heat loss is. But with that insulation value I had from the SIP walls and the SIP roof, my highest heating bill for 2,800 square foot sitting on a full basement that was heated as well was $84 a month. And the cooling bills were a fraction of what they'd be in normally as well. So, like I said, SIPs, either way you go, are going to be a much, much preferred way of building for paying you back as it goes down the road. Now, as Bob mentioned earlier, the polyurethane ones, they have a higher R value. They're closer to an R7 per inch. So what that means, going to equate to is you're going to get thinner panels. So you can take a 6.5 inch EPS or a 4 inch polyurethane and get the same R value. You can go to 6.5 inch panel for the roof on a polyurethane, which is going to be a 10.25 in EPS. So there again, just depends on where you're building. We'll look at the codes and the seismic and recommend what we think is the right package for you when it comes to the SIPs. Now, here's some important questions to ask about the SIPs. As like I said, what do they recommend for your particular area? Because Bob mentioned earlier that in certain areas, you can drive 20 miles away and have a whole different snow load, a whole different seismic condition. There's a lot of different things that are involved in that. But one thing we always recommend is two things, basically. One, whenever possible, get the jumbo size panels. Okay, these things start out life as 8 by 24 feet long. So big, huge sections of walls and roof that go up really, really fast. The larger panels you have, the less seams, more energy efficient. It also goes up much faster, so it saves you on labor. I know some companies out there say, well, we build 4 by 8 panels so you can lift them by hand. But you have to put 6 of those up at the same time you put up one jumbo panel. And so if you think about the labor from the process and that, it makes a lot of sense. I did a project years ago with Abercrombie & Fitch. I went out and taught this crew. I was out there for 2 days training them to put panels up on a place called, it was outside Columbus, Ohio, Abercrombie & Fitch World Headquarters. And they'd never seen these panels before. And after 2 days' time, I had them setting a panel every 20 minutes. Because I taught the guys how to prep them, how to rig them, and how to put them up, and they were just amazed. And this construction crew was a really good commercial construction crew, but had never used these before, and they swore by them after that. Also, the other thing is always get the pre-cut panels. You can buy raw panels as well, but there again, on that first house that I built, the GC talked me into buying the raw panels and cutting them on site. And the only way to cut these things out on site is with a chainsaw, basically. And so while he's cutting the windows and doors out on site, and I'm looking around at all my neighbors watching the house go up in awe, and then seeing all these little white beads fly all over the place. Next thing you know, I'm out there running around the yard with my shop vac trying to suck these things up so I don't, make all the new neighbors mad. So pre-cut panels are more than worth the cost to have them done, unless you're doing a barn or something that doesn't have windows or has very few. But like I said, for the most part, they're head and shoulders above the best, or above the raw panels. Now, I know, Bob, you've had some experience with drywalls and T&G on panels as well. How'd that work out for you?
Well, you know what? One of the cool things about the insulated panel is that you have a layer of OSB. So you have it on the inside and the outside. So when it comes to drywall, it's super easy because you have wood everywhere. You're able to attach it. But one of the key things that you want to keep in mind is if you're building a timber frame, is that if we go back to the timbers, remember they shrink a little bit. They shrink around the waist. So if you butt your drywall right up to, let's say, a green piece of oak, which shrinks 1/4 of an inch in 3 years, you're going to have a 1/4 inch gap. So one of the keys here, particularly one of the things that we do here at Timbercraft, is we actually design a 5/8 inch spacer on the back of our timber post. That way the 1/2 inch drywall can slide back behind there in case there's any shrinkage. So what that does mean is when you paint, you do have to cut in. Make sure you get your paintbrush just slightly behind to get that in there. But I'm telling you, hanging anything, cabinets, anything, you have OSB everywhere. Now, on the outside of the building, it's OSB. It's just like an ordinary house. Whatever type of siding, hardy plank, wood shingles, all of it is an option. Now, there are some companies out there that are offering laminating the T&G directly onto the insulated panels. Now, as an entrepreneur, I started thinking about that and said, wow, when I normally raise a timber frame, it takes 2 to 3 days for me to raise a timber frame. And then I have one whole day, maybe even a half of another day, climbing all around this timber frame and installing the tongue and groove. And so I went ahead and I sent all of my pre-finished ponderosa pine out to this company, and they laminated my T&G to the panel, because I started thinking, wow, I'm going to save all this money. I'm going to be able to set the panels with the T&G. Now, if you look at that photo, you notice that there's straps and there's slings going all the way. Now, my finished product was on the bottom. And when you typically fly these in, you land them on the timbers, you slide them down, and you slide them over. Slide them down, slide them over. Panel after panel after panel. As a panel installer, you climb up, you normally set one side of a roof, and then you come down just because the balls of your feet and your calves are really sore from being on the steep pitch. And that's when I looked up and I realized all the scuff marks on my beautiful ponderosa pine. One thing I didn't budget for was one day to go up and palm sand the entire structure, and then to mask off the timbers and reapply the polyurethane. There are some companies that offer to do it. As somebody who's probably set 80, 90 panel jobs myself, I don't quite know how. That's why you normally climb up on top of the timber frame, install the T&G. Now, as a guy that walks beams way up in the air or walks roofs, you know how nice it is to have a tongue groove deck on the entire ceiling to be able to move around. So typically, one of our suggestions here is to avoid getting be it the drywall or the T&G laminated ahead, and just account for that. And also another important thing is just going to be the different warranties that all these different companies are going to have. Now, if you'd like to learn more about structurally insulated panels, go to YouTube or go to the Timbercraft Facebook or Timbercraft website. And but in particular, it's really easy to find with YouTube. Just search Timbercraft Built for Life, and you'll see all the different webinars that we've put together. We do have an hour-long webinar with lots of detail, both on EPS and polyurethane SIPs. So it's a good learning resource for everybody, Dave.
Yes. Now, the last few critical points we have today are SIPs. Like I said, their structural characteristics are like an I-beam. When you laminate these together, that's what makes them so strong. People don't think this OSB and this foam together, and individually, they're not very strong. But when you laminate them and glue them together, it makes them incredibly strong. Like I said, about 5.5 times stronger than a stick built. But one thing you got to remember when you build a SIP house is you gotta have an air exchange system on it. You got to bring fresh air out or fresh air in and exhaust that moisture out, because just from taking some showers and from cooking, you can create enough steam in the house to cause a problem if you don't have it ventilated. SIPs are also very, very strong when it comes to fires. I've had a project up north that one side burnt through the outside of the chimney, all the way through the inside skin or outside skin, all the way through the foam, and melted on the inside of that second foam. We went back in and actually jacked up the beams on the roof, pulled off 6 panels on the roof, pulled off all those sidewalls, and in 3 days had it back shelled in. The company that was looking to do the repair on it wanted to stick those in. The owner said there's no way. That the fire marshal told me this thing would have been burnt to the ground if it wasn't for the SIPs. So it's definitely, I think that's another key point to SIPs, and they're very green. They only have about 1/5 of the lumber in a SIP house that you have in a stick-built house. So you can build five more houses for every stick-built house. Now, next thing is what do you need to get started? How does this work? Well, it always is great if you have a floor plan or a concept, even a sketch. We'll start with you and work from there. You need to know the location of the property. Some pictures are great because that helps us understand things a little better until we can get out on site and look for the exact place you're going to site it on site. But it gives us an idea of how to start designing this and optimizing your views. The other thing is the budget. You gotta give us a budget to work with so we can work with you on it. Our job is kind of to be the budget police and work on with you to make sure that you can afford to build this. If this is designed by an outside designer or architect, they're focusing on the design and the looks of it. We're going to focus on the design and looks also, but make sure that when it's all said and done, it's affordable to you and you can build it. Because really, if we go through this whole process and you have a house designed and you can't afford to build it, we all lose. Okay, that's how we feed our kids is by being able to produce this home for you. So we always recommend keep your budget, the timber frame portion of your budget, no more than 20-25% max. So you have enough to build, to keep the rest going.
Exactly, and I think that number of 20% is really a good number, particularly if you're going to hire a general contractor. Now, certainly, if you're hoping to put some sweat equity and do some other odds and ends, you may be able to push that up a little bit. But again, it's really important that you're focusing on the budget and the overall house overall. That way, and that's why hybrids are so popular, because anyone with a realistic budget can have a timber frame via the hybrid path. But as Dave talked about, what's the design flow? How do we actually build it? Now, this is an example of a house that I got over on Mount Rainier in Washington. This was a customer sent me their sketches. And this is actually a lot more than what I normally get from customers, but it was the overall feel that he wanted. So what we did here at Timbercraft is we took his sketches and then I put some sketches together, kind of trying to expand it a little bit. And this was the schematic phase. We just wanted to get the right feel and make sure that, okay, conceptually we have 20% allocated for the timber frame, and this is the floor plan that we're able to do. The next step in the process was getting that pricing confirmed, but getting it actually into AutoCAD, into the 3D realm. That way they could actually see we detailed all the different. Now this happens to be a hybrid. It's fairly heavily timbered. We have a really, really cool porch that goes off the great room. That kitchen dining area, all of that is open. But then off to the right was a bedroom upstairs and a master suite downstairs. Now, even though this was a hybrid, it feels fully timber frame because we still needed the structural timbers to support the SIP roof. So this is more or less how the design process goes as you build. And here is the colored in 3D rendering that we did. And then here is my picture Friday. We started the job on Monday, and this is as far as we got by the end of the week. So you can see how what we designed and what delivered actually came out to be the exact same thing.
Yes, and like I said, we're running out of time, so we want to there again ask you, feel free to let us know if you've got any questions. Send them to bob@timbercraft.com, dave@timbercraft.com. We'll be glad to get back with you about it, and we really appreciate during these trying times you taking the time to watch our webinar. Hopefully you learned something from it, and it was good for you. We really appreciate it. God bless, and have a great day.
Absolutely. And hey, if you also get a chance, definitely like us on Facebook. Once this world settles down, we're going to have timber frame raisings, different open houses. It's a good part of the process. And as Dave said, we really appreciate you watching our webinar. Take care. God bless. We'll see you later.
Thank you for a great presentation, Bob and Dave. As mentioned, if you have any questions, please reach out to bob@timbercraft.com or dave@timbercraft.com, and they will be sure to get back to you. On behalf of our sponsor, Timbercraft, and the Log and Timber Home Show, thank you for joining.